I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Welcome to the Fidelis Leadership Podcast, a place of learning for those who aspire to leadership excellence. Here's our host, Mike Etor.
David Dunkel served as Kforce's Chief Executive Officer and a director since its formation in 1994. He recently stepped down as Chief Executive Officer and is currently serving as Chairman for the Board of Directors. Prior to August of 1994, he served as President and Chief Executive Officer of Romac-FMA, one of Kforce's predecessors, for 14 years. And in the spirit of full disclosure, Dave and I go way back. I obviously worked at Kforce, worked with Dave and for Dave, have a lot of respect for him. And I wanted to have a special person for the 100th episode of this podcast. And so, Dave, thanks for coming. And with that, I know your background. It's so rich, 10 seconds worth. Give us a little bit more. What does the audience need to know about Dave Dunkel?
Well, Mike, thank you. It's an honor to be on 100. And it's a real privilege. I've been watching how you've been doing, and I love Fidelis Leadership Group and just the name and knowing where it came from and my time with you. Funny story about me. If you were to find a high school yearbook, I probably would have been voted least likely to succeed. I was the C student who really wasn't that interested in school. And my guess would be that they've been quite surprised to see where my career did end up. In fact, my mom, I remember after I had gone on to Kforce, my mom went back for a computer course, and one of the teachers, actually happened to be one of my teachers when I was there. And she said, everyone can introduce themselves. My mom stood up and said, "Hi, I'm Pat Dunkel." And the teacher stopped and she said, "Are you related to David Dunkel?" And she says, "Well, yes, he's my son." And her response was, "Whatever happened to him?" It happened to be one of the teachers I gave the hardest time to, but it was funny because I think if I look back on my career now, I'm kind of surprised at where I ended up as well. But I started out basically in a town called East Greenwich, Rhode Island. Not a really good student. Went on to a junior college and found a subject matter that I enjoyed, which was accounting. I came home and told my dad I was going to be an accounting major. He almost fell over. I ended up making Dean's List, transferred to Babson College in Boston, made Dean's List up there, graduated with high honors, got a master's in finance, and went to work for what's now PricewaterhouseCoopers in Boston, and spent 3 years there working on the audit staff. I figured out pretty early on I wasn't going to stay, as most people do in public accounting. And one day I was talking to my dad, and he said he was preparing to go to Tampa because he was exploring opening a Romac office in Tampa. And I was working on an assignment that was on like my 100th hour of overtime in a few weeks. I mean, it was just getting slaughtered. And I hung up and I called him back. This is landlines now. There's no cell phones back at this time. And I said, "Hey, Dad, what about me?" And, the words of encouragement, that affirmation that just is going to fill you full of joy. He says, "You got to be kidding me." And I'm thinking, gee, thanks for the vote of confidence. Long story short, I ended up driving down to Rhode Island. We wrote up a business plan. And worked out a deal. He completely out negotiated me. I took a salary cut, paid my own relocation. I had a pickup truck with no air conditioning in it. So I moved to Tampa and discovered how foolish that was. And then opened the office in August of 1980. And so had an amazing time during that period. Within 3 years, we had the fastest growing office, made Rookie of the Year. And we just kept on going until 1994, when we ended up buying out the whole company, which was at that time a franchise organization. They needed a liquidity plan for the original founding shareholders, and we ended up taking over the firm and then preparing for a public offering. And of course, you know, because you came in right after that. And I remember my dad, when we first wrote up the business plan, he said, you know, son, one of these days we may actually take this public. And we had the privilege of standing on the floor of what was then Prudential Securities as we watched the ROMC ticker symbol come up. And I was standing there next to my dad, and I looked at him and I said, it's amazing that it actually did happen. He got to go home. I had to go to work. And so, as you know, we went through an incredible growth spurt, built a business from zero to, when I left, we were about 1.7 billion. And that was just an amazing journey. Even today, I look back on it and just marvel at all of the things that happened. And most importantly, all the wonderful people that I had the privilege of working with.
Yeah. How many years total, Dave, with Romac and Kforce combined?
I actually stepped down as CEO in January of 22. And they just announced that I was actually a part-time employee to assist in the transition of the CEO role to Joe. And on the just the most recent earnings call, they announced that I was going to terminate that agreement. So now I'm only chairman. I'm no longer a part-time employee. So when you add up all of those years, it's 43 years at Kforce, and then I had 3 years at PricewaterhouseCoopers. And I won't talk about my time as a short order chef at the Newport Creamery.
Well, it was a character builder, I'm sure, you know.
It was indeed.
Well, listen, I ask a couple of standard questions right at the front of all of these interviews, Dave. The first one is, if you were limited to 2 or 3 sentences to state your leadership philosophy, what would you say?
Well, I think if you asked the Dave Dunkel when he first started his career, you would get a very different answer than Dave Dunkel at the end of his career. I learned along the way that the most important consideration of leadership is the people. And you can manage things, but you lead people is an old adage. So number one is to have a sincere interest in and a love for the people. I would say number two is probably character and integrity. You know, integrity is being the same on the outside as you are on the inside. Hitler had integrity because he did exactly what he said he was going to do. And so my view is that if I said I was going to do something, then I was going to honor my word. And so character and integrity would be second. And the other thing I would say is that for me personally, it was my faith that I wanted to use all the gifts and talents that God had given me. And so I applied them to the best of my ability. I'm playing for well done, good and faithful servant when I cross over into eternity. And that means that I've done everything that he asked me to do, and I've used the gifts and talents that he's given me.
Yeah, well said, well said. Well, I always ask the timeless question, leaders, born or made?
Well, I'm a prime example. Having been voted least likely to succeed, I would say that they're definitely made. I don't believe that that leaders are just born. I believe that they're born with gifts and talents that God gives them. Whether or not they actually use them and develop them remains to be seen. But for sure, I've seen people who, like myself, that at a point in time, we would have said, there's no way that guy's a leader. And then God gets a hold of them, skills and talents are manifested, the person's diligence and commitment, all of those things go into the ingredients. And I was a committed learner. I spent my entire life constantly reading, learning, studying the best leaders to figure out what those characteristics were.
You know, I love that. And we have a lot in common on that. I don't know if you know this, you might not have hired me at the time, but I actually got thrown out of Catholic school in the 8th grade and deemed incorrigible by the Monsignor. And he told I saw it, he told my parents, that kid is no good and he's going to end up in prison. Not a
You,
ringing endorsement.
you're not
And
going to believe this. I got kicked out of Catholic school in the 6th grade. I'm not kidding. They called my mother and they said, take him out of here. They tried to break me and they couldn't. They hit me with rulers. They punched me. They did everything, and I laughed at them. I think you and I had more in common than I even knew.
Yes. And then I went to high school. And you remember back in our day, there was 2 tracks, college prep and general education. And you had to take college prep to go to college.
Yep.
Or because, back then you needed 2 years of a language and chemistry and all that. And I just couldn't do the math. I couldn't do it. And I remember my mom, when they called her and said, we got to move him out of college prep, she cried because, her hopes for me, and 227 graduates in my class. I believe I was 218. And so I like to say I was pacing myself for the future, but to your point, I think that, and I want your input on this, to those that are out there that may have gotten some similar endorsements, not so strong endorsements early on, or they're not quite sure they could end up doing what you did. I say, life is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And your mention of the term lifelong learner, I think that's a big deal. Your thoughts?
I totally agree with you. I'm still learning today. I love learning. I love reading. One of the books I'm reading right now is on atomic habits.
I've read it.
Yeah, it's a great book. And, some of the things in there I did out of my own intuitive nature. Some of the things are like, boy, that's a really good idea. I'm going to try doing that. Yeah. And so that's just one. I have a whole stack of books over here, about 4 or 5 more books that are always queued up at the end. So constantly reading, constantly learning, constantly watching, videos, reading articles, because I'm naturally curious. And that's, I feel ultimately, if you're going to stay current and continue to keep your intellectual capacity and responsiveness, you got to be constantly learning and reading.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't know if you'll remember this, but I tell people, throughout my Marine and business career, I took many ASHUINs, all well-deserved for sure. But the single biggest compliment I ever received was from a guy named Dave Dunkel, who said, Mike, one of the best things about you is that you are professionally curious. And, you're constantly learning and reading and all of that. And I never forgot that, because I realized at the time, he's right. I mean, I was 5 newspapers a morning. I was reading, I'd come into the executive meeting. Hey, did you see that article in the New York Times today? That kind of stuff. And I think we were very much aligned like that, Yeah.
I learned leadership from you.
Yeah.
I learned about special trust and confidence. I learned so many things that I didn't know. And I really enjoyed the military perspective, because I always had a view as a chain of command and all this stuff. But, I learned little things like, Marine Corps officers eat last in the mess hall, a true sign of servant leadership. But that stuck with me. That was one of those things that's like, that's a real indication of servant leadership. So all of those things I learned from you, and they stuck with me. And the cool thing is I get to give it away now, because I disciple a lot of people and I get to teach them leadership. And you were a component of that as well.
Well, thank you for that. And the learning was obviously mutual. So let's go into a little bit more, Dave. I have the benefit, unlike any other podcast guest, I observed you, in the chair for 15 years. And I think what you're going to answer this, but I know that you've got strong foundations and strong principles that guided you for as long as I knew you, guided everything you did and said as a leader. Would you share that with us?
Yeah, I think, for me personally, one of the things that I think may have been one trait that I was born with, is I didn't overly value or esteem other people's opinion. And I know today, I mean, you see it with social media and whatnot, you know, if you get a thumbs up or a thumbs down, it defines whether you're having a good or a bad day, you know, and I really never cared that much about what people thought about me.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was, yeah, okay. I'm not going to, my goal is not to be liked by everyone. My goal is to be respected. And it would be nice if they liked me, but they're going to respect me because of the way that I honored them, loved them, took care of them, taught them, and I told them the truth. And it may not have been a good truth, but I always did my best to share the truth with them to help people to understand it. And, you know, I didn't go to bed at night worrying about what the newspaper said, you know, or whether there was a thumbs down on my Facebook page, which I'm not even on social media anyway, because I really don't care what they think. But I would say that I didn't esteem other people's opinion of me more than God's opinion of me.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I want to add something for the listeners, Dave. Again, I was there and I saw you under some incredible pressure at times from social media. Remember those early Yahoo chat boards?
Oh, the chat boards.
It was the internet was brand new and they were anonymous and oh my God. And then, you know, I always tell people because, you know, they hit me too. You haven't lived until you've seen disparaging comments about you and your family on an anonymous internet forum. So and of course they were savaging you, your family and everything. And so I saw you take that. And I will say this, I think that there were, and the same can be said about me, I think there were some non-Dave Dunkel fans out there. However, I don't believe there's a single person out there that can legitimately say that you had any other agenda other than the Kforce agenda. And people knew that. And you can't argue with that. That's a totally defensible foundation. Your thoughts?
Yeah, the thing that bothered me about them was when they would manipulate information for their own gain. So they would put out false data, which is what happens now. I mean, you get short sellers out there putting false information out, and they're doing it for their own gain. That's the thing that bothered me the most. It wasn't what they said about me. It was really about what they were doing to manipulate. And then the damage control of our employees and the people that might read it and going, I wonder about how much of this is true. You know, the rumor mill would have had Kforce having been sold 100 times if you believed it, right? And you recall those times when people would come in and say, hey, there's a rumor that we're on the market. It's like, where there's always a rumor they're on the market. Everybody's putting it out there because those are the guys that are trying to, you know, to drive the stock price up. So, yeah, I think, you know, for me personally, those, the issues of having other people and saying things and doing things really wasn't that important to me. The most important thing to me was to do the right thing for the firm as a steward of the role that I was placed in, and to operate with the highest integrity. And so that was basically my view. My
absolutely. Well, Dave, you have 43 years of working with, observing, training, developing leaders in Romac and Kforce, and of course, you have an incredible network. So you've seen a lot of people, including some very high-level leaders in the Fortune 100. You know, you had that kind of pack that you've run with. So I'm going to ask you two related questions based upon your observations. Are there any traits and attributes that seem to be common to the most very effective leaders? And then the other side of the coin, are there traits and commons that seem to be common to the most or the least effective, the ineffective, maybe even the bad leaders?
Yeah, it may surprise you, but I think one word is love, which is to really love and care for the people. Early on in my career, I saw people as a means to be able to accomplish my mission, my agenda. And I learned that actually my mission and agenda was the people. And if I took care of the people and loved the people, then the agenda would take care of itself. So I would say loving the people and then humility, because I can't tell you how many times I heard the comments about, gee, Dunkel's this, Dunkel's that. The funny thing is, early on, I remember the sell side analysts, and one of them wrote, Dunkel's the best CEO in the industry. 2 years later, after our stock cratered, after the Y2K thing, he was writing, he's the worst. So I just started laughing. It's like, well, I just proved my point, right? So humility is key. And that is, there's a scripture verse that says, humble yourself before the mighty hand of God, and he will exalt you in due time. And so God lifted me up when he was ready. In the meantime, staying humble and giving credit to the other people and loving and taking care of the other people, I would say probably the two most important characteristics. On the other side of the coin, self-centeredness and self-exaltation, which is pursuing your own agenda and pursuing your own self-gain, and an unwillingness to deal with truth. That people who are so concerned about being liked that they're trying to win people over and they'll tell them what they want to hear rather than dealing with the truth of it. And so back to my point earlier, it's I know everyone's not going to like me. I just want them to respect me, and they'll respect me if I tell them the truth.
Yeah, that's well, thank you for that solid input for the leaders out there, the listeners. One thing I always tell people, I've had Marines, retired or former Marines say, look, when you get out here in the business, it'll just never be the same as the Marine Corps. And I'll say, no, I disagree. I actually worked with a company where the esprit de corps, the special trust and confidence, if somebody got caught cheating, lying, and stealing, they were gone. And they're like, really? I said, I'm telling you, it was very Marine-like, sometimes more Marine-like than the Marines himself. I said, and that's a compliment. It was good. And so where I'm going is, by the time I got to Romac and we switched over to Kforce shortly thereafter, well, you had already had the epiphany about people are the magic. So you were already there. And then I saw, when I joined, I think Kforce, Romac was 12 companies rolled into one. He did all those acquisitions and all of that. And so you as a CEO had to earn and develop trust now to bring them all under one umbrella. And I was there. That was not easy. And some people didn't want to come under that umbrella. So I'm talking about trust, which I think is so valuable. As you know, I titled my book off it, Trust-Based Leadership. So you did it, and you did it well, Dave. Any advice for leaders on how they can engender and cultivate a culture of trust within their team, no matter how big or small it is?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of simple. It's just honoring your word. It's really not that difficult. I mean, trust isn't something that you can demand from someone. Trust is something that's earned. And scripture verse says you can trust a man in small things, you can trust him in large things. And so as you test a person's ability to be trusted, it usually starts with something small. I mean, you're not going to hand over $1 million to somebody you've never met. It's going to be someone who you've learned to trust over time, and they've earned it by the way they've conducted themselves and been consistent with honoring their word and commitments to you. And it's the same thing with me. I earned the trust, and I did it by telling them the truth. And there were people that didn't like it, and there were people that were terminated. But in the end, I was going to do the right thing. And I'm sure you remember the stories of the one guy who came to me and said, hey, I'm a big shareholder in this firm, and this is what I want you to do. And I said, I'm a bigger shareholder in this firm. Sit back down. And so sometimes you got to give them the bad news. And so part of my responsibility was to give them the bad news. No, this is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to do things. This is how we're going to conduct things. And, and you were a part of it. You were a big part of that culture, because one of the reasons we started the leadership program was because of all those companies that we bought. And we knew we had to bring in consistent, disciplined leadership that operated on integrity. And, you were the model for it.
Yeah, well, thank you, for that. And related to trust, I absolutely agree. You got to go in gradual steps and all that. That said, one thing that you specialized in, and it bled throughout really the whole culture, but the executive team at first, was while your judgment was fine, you were willing to take chances on people. Probably at some point, none more than the chances you took on me. I tell the story, the classic story where, we had a failing IT group, and second CIO in a row went, bona fide techie, his predecessor, bona fide techie, and you and Bill turned to me and said, Mike, we'd like, so here's a, phys ed major, not a techie, whatever. And you put me in charge of 176 people, probably a $30 million budget, and they hadn't done good for a long time. And you took some criticism online for that. Like, what? I mean, Mike's a good guy, great, Marine, all that, but he's not a techie. This will never work. And I'd like to hear a little bit about your thought process, because it wasn't just me. You did that to several people along the way.
The current CEO cycled through talent, marketing, finance, operations. He actually was the chief financial officer of the firm, wasn't CPA, and didn't even have a degree in accounting or finance.
I remember that.
So what was the leadership principle that was applied there? He was a leader. For me, it was kind of easy. One of the ways that I could tell who the leaders were, all I had to do was to watch the person's office. And I could tell because the other people would go to him and seek advice and wisdom and counsel. And so all I had to do to figure out who the leaders were was to watch who the people went to for advice and leadership. So it was kind of a simple principle, but it worked. And in your case, what was really clear was how quickly you got to know the people. And I remember you would go through and you could introduce me to any person in that department, and you could tell me their family, their background, how long they've been at Kforce, what their role was. And it goes right back to where we started, which was to take a sincere interest in people, genuine care and love for the people. And you did.
Yeah, thank you for that. I don't know if you know this, but I actually had bios or resumes printed out for every one of those 176 people. And I used to read them on the treadmill. And I thought, I didn't know he was a lawyer. What the hell is he doing in the IT group? And I would say within 60 days, I could tell everybody by their face, name, background, family, or trait, so to speak. And then another story that I tell, and you mentioned it with Joe, when I tell about developing trust to people that understand what I'm talking about, the publicly traded arena, I said, now look, it was a stretch putting me in front of the IT group. Let me tell you what else he did. He put a non-finance guy, a non-accountant, never been in the finance department, and he made that guy the CFO of a publicly traded billion-dollar company. And that gets their attention like, what? I said, now, don't get me wrong. The CEO and the former CFO put their arms around him. But trust me, that was an eyebrow-raising move at the time. And the guy did great. Of course, I'm talking about Joe, who now is the CEO.
Yeah, and I give a lot of credit to Bill Sanders. I mean, Bill was a big part of that. Bill was your advocate. He was Joe's advocate. So, he was always a talent-driven guy as well. And so his input and his own leadership helped to shape mine. I think one of the things one of our directors said to me, I think really kind of rings true. I once asked him, he'd been on 30-something boards, and he said, this is the best board I've ever been on. And I said, why would you say that? He said, it's really simple. It's because you listen to us and value our opinion. I mean, that to me is a really big statement. And of course, my obvious question was, well, why wouldn't you? I mean, you want wisdom. I've got a board of these amazing people with great backgrounds. Of course, I want to hear what they think. I don't want them to just nod their head and say yes. Same thing is true in the leadership principles with the people around you. I don't want a subordinate just nodding their head and saying, oh, yeah, I'll do whatever you say. Yeah, I agree with you. If we're all agreeing, then, something's wrong, right? So I did look for people who would fight back and push and would challenge me. One, I just enjoyed the intellectual process of, okay, let's go spend some time and crank this thing out and figure out what the right answer is. But two is that's how they earn my respect. There's a willingness to challenge me. And so you did, Joe did, you know, a lot of the guys that are there leading the firm today did. And I was smart enough to listen to them. As I always tell people, I was never really good at anything other than picking people and holding on to them.
Yeah. I've actually stolen that a few times. I said, you know, I'm not the smartest guy for sure, but one talent I seem to have is the ability to attract good people on my team and go get them coffee, whatever it takes to keep them there.
Yep.
You know,
Exactly.
enable them. Because
Exactly.
you know, if I hire five people, I'm number 6 on the intellect list for sure. You know, my expertise was hiring smart people. And, you know, I'm not going to say anything about your intellect because you're obviously a highly intelligent guy, but I saw that over the time. And I learned that from you. The attraction and retention of really good people is going to make or break the whole organization.
Yeah, and not being afraid to move them, like you said, taking risk and not being afraid to move them along quickly and put them in roles bigger sometimes than it may appear obvious that they're capable of. And just based on the instinct of watching and seeing them and the way they conduct themselves and so forth. So that's been a career for me to be able to see that and experience that. And the guys that are running the place today are those guys.
Absolutely. Well, again, I was there, Dave, so I saw throughout the 15 years, on several occasions, you come under intense pressure from the board, from shareholders, from social media, from people within the firm itself we, you know, Kforce should do this. We should do that. We should get involved in this. And really what they were a lot of current social issues or fads or special interests, you know, things that, you know, a lot of them could be lumped into like political correctness of the day. And I think a lot of people in your position say, well, everybody else is doing this. They just announced it on their earnings call, so maybe I need to do it too. And I saw you resist that time after time. And you said, and I quote, Kforce will obey all laws and regulations. Outside of that, every decision I make as the chief executive will serve the best interest of the firm. And a lot of people, a lot of times, did not like hearing that. And you stood tall. I respect the hell out of you for doing that. So I want you to talk a little bit about that because someone's listening to this podcast and they're in that position right now, or they will be.
Yeah, it's you know, today it's wokeness is what they call wokeness, and you know the going back, we've cycled through all kinds of different trends, and I don't know if you remember the avatars that came out. Everybody had to pick an avatar back, and it's like, and I was sitting there saying, "What the heck are they doing? This makes zero sense to me." You know, and our people were like, gee, we need to do this too. And it's like, for what? You know, and shortly thereafter, everyone abandoned it because it turned out to be a fad that was chasing, you know, rainbows. But I had good people around me, you know, you, Joe, other people that I would listen to. It's like, wait a minute. And our culture was very strong. To our board's credit, I will say in my time as the CEO of a public company, I've had a great board. Never had a board come to me and say, you really ought to do this. You need to do this. I think they respected me as CEO, certainly held me accountable for compliance with all the rules, laws, regulations, and so forth. But also, when I said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to try to reach an end game. We'll wait. And when it's required of us, then we'll deal with it. In the meantime, we're going to stay focused and be about the business and serving customers and taking care of our people and not chasing rainbows and current trends and fads and whatnot. And, you know, we saw it all the way from COVID through Black Lives Matter and, you know, all of the things that were going on. And, you know, you look back on it now and it's like, what the heck were we doing? You know, it's not that I mean, I get everybody's a special interest group. You know, now I'm an old guy. I'm in the part of the old guy special interest group. So if every individual would stop being so self-centered and started thinking about other people and valuing other people as much or more than themselves, then this nonsense that we'd be dealing with about all this self-centeredness is I want this, I want that, would go away. It's like, why don't you do something really simple? Why don't you go serve somebody else? Why don't you go take care of somebody else and stop being so self-centered? And that's really what we're seeing today. And it's driven by social media and all of these different special interest groups, is this constant focus on self-centeredness. And my view is pretty simple. It's the old comment that Spock made in Star Trek: the benefit of the whole outweighs the benefit of the one. And that stuck with me from back then, and where the whole team is really the most important thing, and no one individual is more important than the team.
Yeah, well said. I can't embellish that at all. Dave, listen, we're winding down here. Based upon what you know now, what would you tell the young David Dunkel, the young CEO of, Romac? Obviously, you learned a lot, you developed. I saw you develop, a lot along the way. What would you tell the 20s and 30s and early 40s, some things that aspire to the C-suite and maybe even the chief executive's role? What do you know now that you wish you knew then, and maybe focused on more as a young guy coming up before you got in the seat?
Yeah, the interesting thing is I never would have seen me in that role. It wasn't something that I aspired to. It wasn't something that I sought after. I would say it came my way. And it came my way because I focused on what I was doing at the time to be the best at what I was doing. And whether it was in a sales role, I remember early in my career, I was one of the top salespeople, but I was failing as a leader. And this is in the first 5 or 6 years. And I was watching turnover, and my new people weren't growing and developing. And I stood up in the last year. I said, this is the last time you'll ever see me win a top sales award, because I'm going to go and become the best leader I ever can be. And I went and focused on that, and focused on developing and training and teaching the people. And so it was really kind of a simple go and focus on what it is that you're doing today and be the very best at it. Continue to grow and learn, and don't reach for something. Let it come to you. If you're working in an organization, let them come to you because of how well you're excelling and how well you're performing. I remember Joe, I talked to Joe, he said, "Do you realize that I never once asked for a promotion?" And he was right. He never did, because he just earned it. He just excelled at what he did. And so it was when he excelled at what he did. And to a degree, you experienced the same thing on moving into the CIO role. So don't reach for something, let it come to you. And if you're truly excelling at what you're doing, people will find you. You're not going to have to exalt yourself. They'll find you.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. Absolutely. Well, listen, I can't let you out of here without asking you a fantasy question I ask everybody. So, Dave, if you were allowed to bring back, or able to bring back, one leader from the past, 20 years ago or 20 millennia ago, whatever, who would you bring back to spend a day with, and why?
It's really a cool question. In my time and learning, I've read all about the Jack Welches and all the great business leaders and whatnot, and then some of the great presidents. I was born on February 12th, the same day as Abraham Lincoln. So my mother spent years teaching me about Abraham Lincoln, giving me all these books, and the courage that he demonstrated, and in the times of trial and so forth. So I learned from that. But I would say, as my faith grew, the one leader that I've learned the most from is Jesus. And reading the scriptures and seeing how he treated people. He loved the people. He esteemed people higher than themselves. This is God becomes a man and is willing to serve everyone else. Okay. And up to and including giving his life for them. And there's a scripture first that says that no greater love can a man have than this, than to give his life for his friend. It's one of the things that you teach in the Marine Corps. And it's such a fundamental thing, but it's so rarely seen. And so any leader that's willing to sacrifice themselves for the benefit of somebody else, in my view, is the greatest leader. The good news is I get to spend every day with them because I spend time studying scripture and praying and listening. And so there'll be a day when I'll pass into eternity when I finish running through the tape, and I'll get to see them all the time. But it's no question about it. In terms of staying power, impact on the world, and so forth, it was Jesus.
Yeah. Gary, you're not the first one to point out that guest, and it's inarguable. And I will say again, as someone that observed you for 15 plus years, you not only studied it, you lived it. And so I think that when it comes time to cross the divide, I kind of think there's probably a seat reserved for you. So good on you. And I would like to say this, Dave, before I let you go, personally, I can't thank you enough for taking a chance on me. I remember going to the interview and, telling my family, well, I'm going to this interview in Tampa, but I'm doing it for my friend. We're not going to Tampa. I sat down and ran through some interviews, and then you came in, and within 10 minutes, I'm like, I kind of like this guy, I can work with this guy, and of course the rest is history. And then I came down, but I can't thank you enough for what you've done for me and my family. I've told my children throughout the rest of your lives, and you tell your children this, if they ever meet somebody with the last name Dunkel, ask them, are you in any way related to David Dunkel, who was the CEO of Kforce? And if they say yes, you go out of your way to help that person, because Dave Dunkel helped me, took chance, groomed me, developed me, and he changed the trajectory of our family for at least 3 generations.
Wow.
That's a tall statement. Why I text you every Thanksgiving thanking you for it. I can't thank you enough, Dave. I love you, and you've done so much for me, and I just can't express how much I admire and thank you for it.
Well, I can tell you this, I wouldn't have been here if it weren't for you. The impact that you had on my life, what you taught me, the example you set. As I said, I learned from everybody. I learned a lot from you. And so I'm grateful to you as well, and love you and love the 𝐄𝐃 family. And so it's been an honor to do life with you, and I'm always here for you in any way that I can help you until my time comes to cross the great divide, as you said, and run through the tape. And I'll conclude with this final statement: Semper Fi.
Well, on that note, Dave, thank you so much. The only thing I'll ask selfishly is you got more runway ahead of you, so that divide's not going to get crossed on. Come back again sometime. You've got more to share with this audience, if you would.
Be happy to. Blessings to you, brother.
Blessings, Dave. Thank you so much, and Semper Fi right back at you.
We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Please subscribe, rate, review, and recommend to your friends. Please visit our website at fidelisleadership.com and sign up for our leadership newsletter. Until next time, remember the words of the ancient Greek philosopher Pericles.
What you leave behind is not what is engraved in stone monuments, but is woven in the lives of others.